Alright, this is take 3 of this video. I want to do a video about the Second Amendment. I want to talk about gun rights and gun restrictions and the Second Amendment overall. So, before we get into it, let me say first and foremost, I don't know what the right approach is as far as all of the laws that are really needed and that would be best suited in regards to gun ownership. I don't have as much knowledge as some people, and I'm certainly not smart enough to know what the best laws would be in regards to this. All I have is my opinion, and that's what this video is. It's just my opinion. And I know this is a really touchy topic, and a lot of people get really angry over it. But let's remember, it's okay to have different opinions. Now, if someone wants to talk to me about anything that I've said, I'm more than happy to get responses. If the best thing that you can say is I'm wrong and I'm an idiot, that's kind of pointless, and those kind of responses aren't really helpful. If you have something useful and interesting to share, it's information that it appears I am unaware of, and it seems like maybe that would make me change my mind or firmly convince me that what I'm saying is accurate, that's useful information. So if and when anybody decides to comment, try to keep it constructive. I don't care if it's positive or negative, it can still be constructive. That said, I'm not entirely positive everybody really knows what the Second Amendment says. So I'm going to read the whole thing. It's not that long, but here we go. A well-regulated militia, being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Now, there's a lot to unpack there. That's quite a bit all put into one paragraph. You have to take into account it's talking about militias, it's talking about the security of a state, and it is talking about the rights of the individual people, the citizens of both the state and the country, to keep and bear arms, and how those rights shall not be infringed. But it's all wrapped together as one thing. And you have to take that in mind. It's not just an individual part that we're talking about. This is one complete sentence. So when people tell me, well, the Second Amendment says I have the right to bear arms, well, that's not all it says. And you're ignoring a large portion and a large meaning of the Second Amendment when that's all you focus on. So let's go through it here a little slower. The Second Amendment, a well-regulated militia. Okay, militias are different now than they were when this was written. And you have to take that into account. Back in the time that this was written, standing armies were not considered a regular thing. They weren't something that the Founding Fathers originally had planned on being a normal government entity. So the fact that we now have standing armies, or a standing army comprised of multiple branches, means that everything is different. It's changed, and that has to be taken into account. The fact that the concept of what a militia was and what a militia is now is entirely different has to be taken into account. Back then, a militia was just the citizens coming together to engage in war if war was necessary. And that's entirely different. And back then, if a citizen didn't have, for example, a musket, a gun, whatever, they would bring a pitchfork to go to war with. Wars aren't fought with pitchforks anymore. militias aren't going to solve the problem of war when the enemy has nuclear missiles. So things are entirely different. And that has an impact on how you perceive and enforce the Second Amendment. It also has an impact on how it has changed from then till now. So, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Okay, now, it's talking about states not being free. Therefore, the people need to have the right to bear arms. Well, all of our states are free. We are united as states to form our country. But all of our states are free, and we do have states' rights. So, as yet, there is no need for a militia to guarantee that states remain free because they are free. Now, does that mean that we shouldn't be prepared? Of course not. But as things have changed from then till now, again, the duty and quality of a militia actually ensuring states' freedom is not the same as it was. And that has to be taken into account. So, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. So again, the Second Amendment is really dealing with states and the population of that state being free from an over-tyrannical government. Now you can say the government has gone too far, it's got too much power, it's too many rules, too many regulations, too many laws. That's up for debate, that's up for question. I personally would agree there are too many laws, restrictions, and regulations. But in a society, laws are created, presuming that we're not talking about people in power being criminals and only looking to line their pockets, which I know a lot of people are going to jump on that right away here. But laws are created in a society for the purpose of protecting the majority. And that's something else we have to take into account, because that's going to come up here in just a minute in the latter half of my video. But I see all the time people say, you know, the Second Amendment, because criminals don't care about laws. So I need to have a gun, and you can't take away my right. Okay, but guess what? Okay, let's think about that for a second. Because we have laws against murder. And you would think you don't need to put a law into effect that says it's not okay to just go murder someone because you're angry at them. But we did. We had to. Because if you don't have a law on the books, people can do it. So you need laws. And it's not a case that criminals don't care about the law. It's a case that the law has to be there so you can enforce it and put that criminal in jail, or whatever is necessary to do to that criminal because they broke the law. If you don't have a law, the law isn't breakable. This is common sense. So, yes, I understand that criminals aren't going to care about the laws. But if you don't have a law, you can't enforce it, and you can't prevent someone from doing something that hurts society more than it helps. And that's the balance when you have a society. You have to take into account what's best for everyone and what's important for the individual and you have to balance that. And sometimes the way that you come up with an answer, the balance that you find, isn't going to make everybody happy. Quite often, it's not going to make everybody happy. And that's one of the downfalls of being in power, is trying to come up with the right answers that are actually both going to be the best answers and are going to keep the people happy. It's a very difficult thing to do. And while I do agree that there are a lot of problems with our government, there's a lot of people in the government that are only looking out for their own best interest. The fact of the matter is, no matter how you play it, it's a lose-lose, because when you try to put something into effect to help the majority, you're almost always going to hurt someone in some way. Maybe not physically, but you're going to inconvenience their life in some way by making things better or safer for a larger majority of people. And that's what we really have to deal with here. When we're talking about the Second Amendment, that's the issue. It's always a case of balance. What's better for everyone? So, a lot of times, I can talk about a topic, an issue, whatever, and talk about the pros, talk about the cons, talk about whether I think it's good or bad, right or wrong, what I think about one perspective of it, and then what I think about the other perspective of it. And just because I'm talking about all those different things about an idea or an event or an occurrence doesn't mean that I have even once discussed my personal opinion on it. All I am discussing is the idea or the event or whatever is the topic at hand. But a lot of people don't seem to understand that there's a big difference between talking about something, no matter whether you support it or don't support it, or talk about the pros or cons, whether it's good or bad, and actually talking about your opinion about something. They can be entirely different. So right now I'm going to get into my opinion, because I've talked about what I believe the Second Amendment says. And I'm not going to talk about the way I think the laws should be enforced and what it should mean from a legal standpoint, because I don't have the knowledge and the information and the legal capability to come up with those answers. I just talked about what it said and what I think it said. So now I'm going to tell you what I think. I think that in this day and age, it would be really nice if guns didn't exist, period. I think that weapons, whether they're guns or not, are designed for the sole purpose of causing injury. And it would be really nice if we didn't need to cause injury to one another anymore. That's what I think. But before anybody gets all excited and jumps to conclusions, I know that's a fantasy land. I know that is not the case right now, and I know we are nowhere near that state of evolution. I know that people will hurt each other, and I know that people have the right to try to defend themselves from being hurt. So with that being said, I do support someone's right to self-defense. And because of that, I support people's right to own weapons, including guns. If someone breaks into a person's house with the intent, even if it's just with the intent to steal something, money or a particular item, so that they can sell it or whatever, even if they don't mean any physical harm, if someone breaks into a person's house, I'm sorry, they get whatever they have coming to them. whatever happens to them, they have brought upon themselves. If they wind up getting shot, I'm going to have no sympathy for them. So when I read stories about, someone breaking into a house and the homeowner shoots them, and then the homeowner gets sued because he shot the intruder, unless there's something going on there that no one is talking about, that's just pure BS. Because you have to have the right to defend yourself. And when you're in your own home, I don't see how anybody else has higher rights than you do. Now in England, there was an event recently in England where a homeowner was charged with murder because someone broke into his home and he killed them. But when you stop there, okay, it doesn't sound very good. It sounds like that's a load of BS. But when you follow up and learn more about this story, here's what happened. Somebody broke into this guy's house. The homeowner engaged the intruder, and the intruder fled. Now, I don't know exactly whether he was injured or not injured. I don't know exactly how that went. The homeowner didn't leave it at that, which I don't really have a problem with that, but he chased after the intruder, which means they left the person's house. He went after the intruder, and I don't know exactly how this happened. I don't know all the details, but it went something like this. He wound up catching the intruder, and then when the intruder had no means of self-defense, he beat him down, and then he put a bullet in his head. Now at that point, you really have to question why he went to such lengths. He was potentially no longer being threatened. You could say, well, maybe the intruder was running to get help. That's a possibility. And again, I don't have all the details on this news event. It happened in England. But it does make you realize you have to understand the entire story before you jump to a conclusion. Because I don't know what this homeowner did or why he did it in detail. But I know that he went out of his way to both incapacitate the intruder and then kill him when there was no way he could defend himself. And that seems wrong. I'm not saying it is. I don't know what happened. But you have to understand the entire story before you can make an informed decision. So that being said, yes, I support gun rights. Yes, I support someone's right to defend themselves. But when someone says something to the effect of, I'm going to defend myself and my home no matter what, and you have no right to tell me what I use. Okay, well, guess what? You're wrong. I mean, you're just wrong, period. Because it's one thing if you own, for example, a house in the middle of nowhere, so to speak, and you don't have a neighbor for 3, 4, 5 miles. That's one thing. Because then the weapon you use to defend yourself probably is only going to hurt your own property if it doesn't hit the target. However, in a high populated area, and that's what we deal with most of the time nowadays, is high populated areas. In a high populated area, in a high density population location, like for example, the middle of a city in an apartment complex, the weapon that you use matters if you're going to defend yourself. Because, just for example, if you're using a gun the bullet can go through the target even if you hit them. It can go through walls, it can go through windows, and it can find its way to an undeserving victim and kill them or cause serious injury. And that is a problem, because you have the right to defend yourself, but you have to do it logically. And if in defending yourself you use something that is overpowered and it causes injury or death to someone you did not intend it to because you made a bad choice, that falls on you. Now, just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I am going to put a link in the information here with the video that talks about wall penetration of different bullets. Now, they're talking about a shotgun, and I'm not entirely confident that a shotgun is the best weapon for home defense, but it's a whole lot better than some of the weapons that I hear what I'm going to call these gun yahoos bragging about using. It's not so much that you have the right to have a weapon. It's that you also have the obligation to make sure that you don't hurt other people. Just because you're defending yourself doesn't mean that it's okay to act in a way that causes injury to other people. And that's where the biggest problem comes in. That's where a lot of these gun laws and restrictions and regulations come into play. And nobody really wants to talk about that. They want to talk about how they're going to lose their guns. Recently, there was a school shooting, and some people say that school shootings are just a conspiracy, an event that liberals actually pay to have happen so things can look bad so they can make gun laws. Okay? I'm not gonna really get into that, but what I know is that there was a school shooting in California, and I know innocent people were killed. And it was on the news, and I was in a public area where there were multiple people watching the news, and somebody a little bit down from me was watching, and they said, "Oh, it's things like this that really suck, but the worst part is that they may put laws into effect that inconvenience my right to own a weapon." Again, I don't know what the best answers are. I don't know what the best laws are. But I know that when someone is seriously concerned about their life being inconvenienced because something might happen in the future that would be designed to prevent death and injury to young children, there's something wrong there. There's a little bit of misguided value placement. You have to take into account what's better for society. And if we can't do that, maybe we shouldn't own a gun to begin with. A couple years ago, I was talking to somebody about the Second Amendment. And this was back when there was the shooting at a movie theater. I don't remember exactly, but I believe someone walked into a movie theater and opened fire on the people watching the movie. And then he wound up running outside, and I can't remember if the police captured him or shot him or he killed himself or what. But multiple people were either injured or killed in the theater. And the person that I was talking to about that event was like, "Oh, if I'd have been there and I had my gun, I'd have shot him and that whole thing would have ended right there on the spot." Okay, these are the type of people that I call gun yahoos, because they don't, in my opinion, use common sense. If you're in a pitch black, large area with a lot of other people, and someone opens fire, and they're not targeting an individual, they're just open fire at anyone and everyone, hoping that they hit somebody. But you think that somehow, in the darkness, with people panicking and theoretically trying to get out of the way, running, whatever the case may be, somehow you're going to be able to find that person that is shooting, target them in the dark, and hit them without risking the life of an innocent bystander. There's a whole lot of no to that thought process. Now, do I think that people have the right to defend themselves? Yes. But when someone wants to talk about how amazing they are and how they could just take out anybody that is causing a problem, and the whole world would be better if they had a gun, and we need to go back to the Wild West, which, by the way the West is shown in movies is not the way the West really was. That's dramatized so that gun yahoos can think it's cool. But when people start talking about how amazing they are and how having a gun would allow them, in a situation where it's not safe or likely that they'll be able to target someone, but they'd be able to do it and save the day, to me, that defeats the purpose of what you're trying to talk about, because you're trying to talk about the importance of being able to own a gun, and yet you're making the point that you have no idea how to safely own and operate a gun. So, again, when people engage in the conversation about the Second Amendment, a lot of times I think that people use absolutely no common sense and they make ridiculous statements. Now, this happens on both sides, so don't think that I'm just going with the gun yahoos, because there's also people that on the side of gun restriction and gun regulation have a lot of stuff to say that makes absolutely no sense either, and they clearly don't think about what they're talking about. But I support gun ownership as long as it's logical, as long as the owner of that weapon is trained and proficient, and they know why, when, where, and how to use the weapon that they own. If they don't, they shouldn't own it yet. And I don't think that's a bad idea. If you don't know how to use and safely use and proficiently use a weapon that can kill someone, you need to get the training to do it. That's the type of restriction and regulation that I want to see. Background checks. I have nothing against background checks. If you are a criminal, you have felonies, under any normal circumstance that I can think of, I don't want you to have a gun. If you have mental issues that cause you to be mentally unstable, I don't want you to have a gun. And if people can't understand that point of view, then I'd really like to discuss it with them, because I don't know why. So what's my take on the Second Amendment? First of all, my take is that I don't think people actually know what it says, nor do they understand what it means, nor do they want to, because all they care about is that they can say it means they have a right. And I think that gun ownership is something that, unfortunately, we need to keep intact, because people need to defend themselves. But a gun owner needs to be educated and safe. That's my take on it. Thanks for watching, and if you want to leave a comment, feel free.